You can't be an environmentalist if you do the following: take flights, use plastic, eat meat, use a car, or other things we've seen online that do not provide any nuance. But the biggest thing that has been talked about in the carbon footprint realm is that it's being thrown left and right today, and we're going to talk about them because I have an issue with the term carbon footprint. The term carbon footprint was created to quantify the environmental impact of different activities. Driving a car to work, the food you eat, and the activities you partake in are all examples of factors that can play into your own carbon footprint. Many people thought this was a step in the right direction, but the term has started a larger conversation. Why are we paying attention to individual footprints when the impact of corporations is far greater? The messy truth is described in the Mother Jones article with the critical question: did fossil fuel companies invent the carbon footprint to distract of their actions? Author Rebecca Solnit traced the creation of the term carbon footprint back to big oil companies, while sustainability researchers like Michael Sabatzi assert that fossil fuel corporations didn't invent the term, but instead co-opted this concept. However, he argues that the term can still be used in a useful way to think about environmental impacts. How useful is carbon footprint as a metric, and what is missing from the conversation? Sapaixi and Solnit both have a point. It's true BP used and publicized the term carbon footprint to help distract from their role in global warming. However, when you set aside criticism of the fossil fuel industry for a moment and analyze carbon footprints, a disturbing and revealing trend appears. A report developed by Oxfam analyzed carbon footprints and found that the wealthiest 10% of global population contributed to nearly half of global emissions between 1990s and 2015. The same study showed that the richest 1% were responsible for more than double the emissions of the 3.1 billion people that make up the poorest half of humanity. Yet, when carbon footprints being amplified, the pressure was on for everyone to reduce their impact. Our conversation now is really about policies and actions addressing the emissions at the top and the inequity associated with it. As severe weather events increase, economically exploited countries will continue to be affected the most, so the term carbon footprint does not necessarily extend itself to people in the global south. It is usually targeted towards people in the global north. As someone living in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, there's sometimes the thought that my own environmental impact is more than many of others. However, the focus is on the small number of billionaires and the millionaires that rule that they write. So, how does this information influence our decision making? Does our carbon footprint matter, or is that it's limiting us? For me, I often advocate for both personal and systemic change and try to hold the space for both truths. That the carbon footprint can still be useful to highlight inequity while still lacking a focus on empowering systemic change. It's not an either or situation. Even in environmental spaces, I tend to lose people when I begin to talk about race, class, and gender and how they relate to environmental issues. It's easy to discuss what products are the most sustainable or the impacts of items and our own activities, but what happens when we dig deeper into these conversations? Could carbon footprints help us talk about environmental inequities stemming from race, class, and gender? Carbon footprints, or concepts related to the impacts of individual decisions, are still marketed and remain a popular, if misconstructed, aspect of the environmental movement. We can shift our thinking by asking the following questions. What does it mean when building sustainable movements? Research like Oxfam shows us that the carbon footprints aren't useless or strictly fossil fuel propaganda. They provide some valuable insight on how inequity relates to environmental impact and help many people become introduced to environmentalism. This debate highlights that carbon footprints can't be a stopping point, but rather should be a tool and stepping stone on the way to a just and equitable future. The language around carbon footprint may continue to shift, and we can talk about a corporate footprint versus a human footprint, maybe even a handprint for humans like ourselves. Who knows? I've been using the term carbon handprint for some time just because it really focuses on the individual. Through this debate, we can better understand the importance of language and how it can be weaponized for our interests and manifesting power. The history of the carbon footprint and its role in the environmental movement shows how the term has helped us gain, but also slowed us down. And I believe in reductionism. Live the way that you wish people live by your values, reduce your waste, do what is most accessible to you. Go ahead and reduce your carbon footprint however you can. It's certainly not a bad thing. Each of those decisions still remains a part of a larger global movement, but my issue is that when you begin to interrogate others from different class statuses, especially poor people, that's another conversation to be held. However, on that journey, keep in mind where your attention is being focused. Keep in mind that the richest 1% pollute more than double the amount of over 3 billion people. Keep in mind that the fossil fuel companies operate within a power dynamics at an average person. Putting ourselves against each other and making ourselves feel bad will further create fragmentation in movements, and movements in the environmental sector should really be focused on justice, reciprocity, and love. If you really love this video about carbon footprints, please consider liking and subscribing my work. What do you think about carbon footprints? I think for what it's worth, it's not to say that they're useless or they're good, but it's rather to examine of where we're going to be implementing these terms in our writing, in our relationships, or in our personal lived experiences.